Hello beautiful people and welcome to my channel. It's my first video on here. You may know me from my other channel, which is linked down below. It's the same name as this channel, it's just lowercase. As you can tell, I'm not very creative. I have about 1.6k on there, so you probably don't recognize me from there, but some of you may have come from there. However, I have decided to make a true crime channel because I have been researching true crime for about 4 years now, and you know, I thought it was time. So, welcome to my channel. My name is Mackenzie. I go by Kahenzie on YouTube. Since today is my first video, I thought we should talk about the first case that I ever researched, the case that started it all for me. The case of Lizzie Borden, or the murders of Abby and Andrew Borden. Lots of different names this case is called. You probably recognize the name Lizzie Borden, or maybe even recognize the rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe, she gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. That rhyme isn't really accurate, however, it definitely displays the eeriness of this case. We are going to get into this case, but I do want to just give a really quick disclaimer that this video is not made to shed any disrespect on the victims in this case. My videos are made for two purposes: to educate and to spread awareness, and nothing said in this video is meant to be disrespectful. Today I have some tea here to help me. I'm going to be talking a lot, so I'm gonna need something to drink. But without further ado, let's get into this case. And this case is so interesting. Not only was it the first case that I ever researched, but I think it's one of the most interesting cases I've ever researched, and probably one of the most interesting cases out there. So this case is unsolved, and it takes place in Fall River, Massachusetts in the late 1800s. This family revolves around the Borden family, which consisted of Andrew Borden, Abby Borden, Emma Borden, who was the eldest sister in the Borden family. She was 41 years old at the time, and the youngest sister, Lizzie Borden, who was 32 years old at the time. The Bordens also had a maid named Bridget Sullivan that lived in the house. However, she was called Maggie a lot, and I never really found out like why she was called that in my research up until recently. I discovered that she was actually called Maggie because the family's old maid's name was Maggie, and the Borden sisters just never really wanted to learn her name, so they just continuously called her Maggie. How nice of them. Honestly, just something about that lays out the foundation for how we are gonna feel about Miss Lizzie Borden here. Just the disrespect. It's worth mentioning that Abby Borden was not actually Lizzie and Emma's biological mother. Their biological mother, who was Sarah Anthony, or is better known as Sarah Anthony Morse Borden, I know, long name, actually passed away pretty young, and so Andrew remarried to Abby, who then became Abby Borden. Something important about this case is that Lizzie and Emma did not like Abby. Lizzie literally hated Abby, could not stand her. There are reports that said that Abby was actually a really good stepmother, and that Lizzie and Emma were just blatantly disrespectful, just did not like her. But there are also reports that say that Abby was actually a horrible stepmother, and that's why Lizzie and Emma didn't like her. However, the only people that can really testify as to how Abby treated them are Emma and Lizzie, and they're dead, so we don't really know, and I'm not gonna make accusations about Abby when I don't truly know how she treated the girls. But it's just really important to keep in mind that Lizzie and Emma do not like Abby at all. When Sarah Anthony, also known as the biological mother of Lizzie and Emma, passed away, Emma, who was the older sister, kind of took the place in Lizzie's life as her mother figure. So when Abby kind of stepped in, that place was already kind of filled by Emma. The girls really seemed to stick together in the fact that they did not like Abby. So there are a lot of interesting things about this family and just Lizzie in general. The first thing is that Andrew Borden was actually a very successful businessman. I say businessman, he did a lot of different things. Like, he didn't just really have one income throughout his whole life. He did many different things. He owned different properties, and throughout my research I came across a ton of different things that he did that brought him income. And like I said, he was very successful. He was extremely wealthy. I think up to today's standards or like money today, that he was worth anywhere between 10 to 15 million dollars. So that's a lot of money. But strangely enough, Andrew was actually very frugal. He was described as a penny pincher. He was extremely cheap, which is weird because, like I said, he was extremely wealthy. The Bordens lived pretty frugally. They lived in a smallish house, especially for that size of a family, including the maid, Bridget. By the way, I will be calling the maid Bridget throughout this entire video, just out of respect for her because that was her name. But she's referred to as Maggie by Lizzie and Emma. But the house was pretty small. It was super simple, just like furniture and whatnot, nothing extra. He was also very cheap with food, which can lead to some problems later, which we'll get into. Now, if it wasn't interesting enough that Andrew, even though he is extremely wealthy, is a penny pincher and is extremely frugal, what makes this case even more interesting is that Emma and Lizzie wanted to live lavishly. They hated the fact that their father was extremely frugal. They wanted to live a wealthy life, and they could have, but their father, like I said, was cheap. He was not into that. And this really pissed Lizzie and Emma off because they wanted to live up on the hill, which is where all of the wealthy people lived. And Lizzie's cousins actually lived up on the hill, and she would actually go over there all the time. She would go to see them, and they would have tea parties sometimes that Lizzie would attend, and she wanted more than anything to live on that hill. Some interesting things about Lizzie Borden herself is Lizzie actually was known to steal things. And this wasn't really confirmed, so take this with a grain of salt, but Lizzie apparently stole things from shop owners, smaller shop owners, which just makes it worse. And apparently Andrew would just kind of tell them to just let her steal it, and he would come back and pay for it later, or they could put it on his tab or whatever. So yeah, Lizzie was kind of like a kleptomaniac in a sense, because she would steal, apparently. But oddly enough, especially when you know the context of the case and why Lizzie Borden is such a big name in this case, and also because she steals stuff, she was very involved in religion. She went to church, she taught Sunday school, and she was involved in a lot of Christian organizations. So she is just clearly a complex person. So now let's get into some things that are leading up to the actual murders themselves. So one thing that needs to be noted is that the week of the murders, or at least a few days before the murders, John V. Morse, who was the brother of Lizzie and Emma's biological mother, Sarah Anthony, he was staying in the house at the time with the Borden family, and he was staying in the guest room, obviously. Another thing to know about people being in the house is that Emma actually wasn't. She was not in the house at all. She was away visiting someone. I think she was visiting some friends, but she was out of town. She was nowhere near the house at the time of the murders. The week of the murders, the family was actually struggling with food poisoning. And like I said, Andrew was very cheap. He was a penny pincher. He would get the cheapest like food options that there were. In court, the maid, Bridget, actually testified that they basically lived off of a mutton-based diet. So food was pretty cheap, and obviously that causes some issues here because the family was struggling with food poisoning. And not only that, but the food poisoning was assumed to be coming from a soup or a stew that the family actually just continuously reheated and ate until it was gone. They continuously got sick from it, or what they thought it was coming from the soup, but they just continued to eat it anyway, which is odd. Like I said, Andrew was cheap. He was like, no, we're gonna eat this until it's gone. But something interesting that came from this is that Abby Borden actually visited the doctor, Dr. Bowen, I think is how you pronounce his name, and she actually said that she was worried that she was being poisoned. Like, not food poisoning, but actually poisoned, like with poison by someone. And Dr. Bowen just kind of shrugged it off. He wasn't really agreeing with it and didn't really take it seriously, but I just thought that was so interesting that Abby was like, yeah, I think this could be poison, like in the food, not just food poisoning. Something I'm going to mention right now that's going to be super important later is that before the murders, Lizzie actually tried to purchase a poison called prussic acid. I've seen it pronounced in different ways in different places. But she tried to buy this poison from like a drugstore, I'm pretty sure, possibly like a doctor, not exactly sure. It's reported in different ways in different places. However, she was denied, obviously, because they're like, why do you need this acid? She tried to say that she had seal coats, like made of seal skin, and she needed the acid to clean them. However, no one was believing this, and she was not given the acid because, of course, they're like, well, no, why do you need that, you weirdo? Okay, sorry for the change of like angles in this video right now. I just got a notification that my camera was out of storage, or my memory card more so was out of storage, so I had to go fix that, but we're back now. So let's get into the actual timeline of the day of the murders, which was August 4th, 1892. So at 7 a.m., Abby, Andrew, and John B. Morse, the uncle, all ate breakfast together, and when Abby was finished, she reportedly got up and started doing her housework that she would do on the daily. At about 9 a.m., Andrew Borden left for work to go do his job. I'm sorry. I feel like this is so awkward because some of the events on here are just so short, but you know, that's what he was doing. He's going to work to go do his job. At 11 a.m., this is when things get interesting, so pay attention. Andrew arrives home from work early, obviously. He was only there for about 2 hours. However, he came home early because he was not feeling well. I mean, obviously, like I said, the family had been struggling with food poisoning. And not just that, but like I said before, the family thought the food poisoning may have been coming from the soup or the stew or whatever it was. I'm just gonna call it soup. And they just kept reheating it and eating it, and that's what they had for breakfast that morning. So obviously he probably wasn't feeling well. So he came home and Maggie had let him in. She had reportedly been cleaning like windows at the time, and I think she was like already downstairs by the door, maybe cleaning windows in the front possibly. And so she let Andrew in the house. Lizzie went to go welcome her father home, go see him for a few minutes. And then Andrew went into the sitting room and lay down on the couch to take a nap. At the same time, about 11 a.m., a neighbor of the Bordens named Adelaide, I think is how you pronounce her name, said that she saw Lizzie out in the barn, and Lizzie said that she was looking for irons, which is something used for fishing. I think they had like a fishing trip coming up or something of the sort. And Adelaide also said that when she saw Lizzie, Lizzie was free of blood, her dress was unstained, it was clean, and yeah, that's what the neighbor said. But when Lizzie came back up to the house from the barn, she said that the door to the back was actually open, which is odd because she could have swore that she closed it. So she goes in and doesn't think too much of it, but thought it was a little odd. We're still on 11 a.m. and this is when Lizzie unfortunately walks into a horrific murder scene. She walks into the sitting room and sees Andrew on the couch with his face completely bashed in. It was obvious that Andrew had been attacked. It was later discovered that Andrew had actually been struck 11 times in the face with either an axe or a hatchet. So whoever did it, it wasn't just once, it wasn't just twice, 11 whole times somebody took an axe or a hatchet and just kept going. So Lizzie is obviously in distress and she calls down Bridget, who was upstairs in her room. Her room was more so in the attic part of the house. So she calls up to Bridget, who was in her room trying to take a nap. So she wasn't really asleep. She wasn't sleeping. She was trying to fall asleep. So Lizzie called up to Bridget. She apparently called for Bridget saying, quote, "Come down quick. Father's dead. Somebody's come in and killed him," end quote. And that quote is what I found on many different resources. However, I don't know if that is confirmed that that's what she said, but either way, she called down for Bridget to calm down. And so Bridget comes down and also sees the scene of Andrew Borden, just this horrific scene. So I saw on a few resources, but not all, that Bridget actually went out to get a neighbor and brought a neighbor back into the house, but this is unconfirmed, so I'm not sure if this is actually what happened or if Bridget was just on her own. But like I said, some resources do say that she went out and got a neighbor and brought them back. I don't know why she would do that though. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe she needed like some comfort or something. I don't know. That is something that is unconfirmed, but a lot of resources do say that. However, at about 11:15 or a little after 11:15, police showed up at the Borden residence and started looking at this murder scene, this horrific murder scene. When police went and looked around, they actually found a box of like tools and stuff in the attic, and in there was a hatchet, but it was not a full hatchet. It was just like the head of a hatchet, and this is referred to in the case as the handleless hatchet. Now my take on this is I think this could have been the murder weapon, and I think because the handle was wood, if any blood got on the handle, it is going to be extremely difficult or even impossible to get off because it's wood. It's like deep in there, it's stained. So I think maybe the handle was taken off because there was blood on it and the hatchet was just like washed off and put back. Maybe whoever did this, probably Lizzie, was trying to make it seem like this hatchet was useless and was just in a box of old tools in the attic or whatever. Police start interrogating Lizzie and Bridget, and it's worth noting that they were interrogating her while there was a post-mortem being done on the dining room table. Now, Andrew was not the only victim here, as we can assume. It's unclear to me whether Abby was found before the police arrived or after the police arrived. I tried to find this during my research, and different resources once again said different things. Some of them said that she was found when the police arrived and police were like, hey, where's your mom? Got some important news to tell her here. And other resources said that she was found because Bridget wanted to know where she was and went to go find her. Either way, Abby was found murdered, and here's how it happened. So basically, the whereabouts of Abby were unknown. Nobody really knew where she was, and obviously her husband had just been killed. Andrew had just been killed. So, you know, where's Abby? So Lizzie actually said to Bridget, who she called Maggie, we've already established this. She said, quote, "Oh, Maggie, I'm almost sure I heard her come in. Go upstairs and see if she's there," end quote. So Bridget does. She goes upstairs, and either she went upstairs by herself if the neighbor thing wasn't true, or she went up with the neighbor if the neighbor was actually there. The thing about this case that is so difficult, that makes it difficult to cover, is that it's so old that information is just continuously like translated wrong and lost in the, you know, process of this case getting older. So different resources report different things. So, you know, if I'm reporting different things or saying, well, this might have happened, but we don't know, that's why. So Bridget either went upstairs by herself, or if the neighbor thing was true, she went upstairs with the neighbor, and they went to go look for Abby, and they found her in the guest bedroom. Now, when Bridget first walked into the guest bedroom, they just saw Abby's feet. They couldn't see her head or the rest of her body. They just saw like her feet from like behind the bed, and they actually thought that she might have just like passed out or fainted. Maybe she saw Andrew downstairs, went upstairs to, you know, mourn her loss, go cry maybe, and passed out, because it really was a brutal scene. Like, it was horrific. But unfortunately, when Bridget actually went to go see what was up, Abby was not passed out. She was like dead, like completely dead. The back of her head had been axed in. She had clearly been attacked. Later, it was found out that she had been axed 18 to 19 times, which is a lot, and even more than Andrew. So like I said, literally whoever did this just kept going and going and going and going. It was clearly a personal attack. So obviously police need to know who did this. Like, who in the would do this? So they were interrogating Lizzie and Bridget, and something interesting but not surprising when they were interrogating Lizzie is that they referred to Abby as her mother, and to investigators, Lizzie actually said, quote, "She is not my mother, she is my stepmother," end quote. So even at this horrific time Lizzie was not down for Abby being called her mother. She was like, nope, that's my stepmother. Very specific. She was being a little picky. So police thought at first that maybe someone had come into the house and had done this. All right, so we're back again. My camera decided that she wanted to die. Anyway, back to what I was saying before I was rudely interrupted. I'm actually not sure exactly where I was. The police originally thought that maybe someone just came in the house and killed the Bordens. However, it was actually discovered that Abby was murdered like a long period of time before Andrew. When police arrived at the house, Andrew was clearly like just killed. Like, he was warm to the touch, the blood was clearly fresh, as weird as that sounds, and it was obvious that, like I said, he had just been murdered. However, when Abby was found, her blood was cold. It was starting to like dry, like she had like dry blood on her, like the back of her head, and it was clear that Abby had been murdered before Andrew had, and it's thought that she was murdered about an hour and a half before Andrew. So why would someone come, like random person, just come in the house, murder Abby, then hide out in the house and murder Andrew? It's possible. People are weird. People do weird shit all the time. But police were just like, yeah, we don't think so. And even if Abby and Andrew had been murdered at the same time, it was just weird, just odd. So they didn't think that the murderer was someone on the outside. They rather thought that it was someone on the inside. More specifically, Lizzie Borden, which is why her name is so important in this case, and you probably know it well. There are a lot of things that make Lizzie the biggest suspect in the case, and we're gonna go over them right now. So, first suspect and most important suspect that we're gonna be talking about is Lizzie Borden herself. So, one thing that really made Lizzie the biggest suspect in the case was her motives. So obviously she hated Abby. She absolutely hated her and was so disrespectful to her. There was actually a dispute with Lizzie and her sister and Abby and Andrew, kind of. It was kind of like involving the whole family, where about 5 years-ish prior to the murders, like a while before the murders, Andrew actually bought a house for Abby's half-sister instead of Lizzie and Emma, and this really pissed Lizzie off, so much to the fact that she went from calling Abby mother to calling her Miss Borden. So yikes. As you can tell, Lizzie was not happy with this, and honestly it could be expected that she was gonna be mad over this. I don't think you guys were expecting me to like tell you this and expect me to be like, oh, and she was perfectly okay with that. You probably already knew she was gonna be mad. So Lizzie obviously hated Abby, and not even just over that, but just for many reasons. And Abby not only was killed first, but she was also killed with more swings of the axe or hatchet, whatever was used, than Andrew was. I mean, Andrew was definitely killed brutally. I mean, 11 times, but 19 times to Abby. Like, it was clear that this was a personal attack, and it was thought that maybe she killed Abby because, you know, obviously she didn't like Abby, and killed Andrew to cover it up, or maybe killed Andrew because he was married to Abby and he bought this house for Abby's half-sister and he wouldn't buy a house on the hill for her and her sister. But another motive that was clear to the police when they thought that Lizzie had done this was money. Like I said, Lizzie wanted to live on the hill, both her and her sister, and Andrew had a ton of money, yet he didn't spend it. Like, he never spent it. He wouldn't buy them a house on the hill for, you know, Emma and Lizzie, and he wouldn't buy the whole family a house on the hill either. So he was obviously a penny pincher, and like I said, this really pissed Lizzie and Emma off. So it was thought that maybe Lizzie killed him and killed Abby to cover it up, or even just killed Abby because she didn't like her, and she did this in order to get money, go and live up on the hill. Money and dislike were the two biggest motives when looking at Lizzie. Things that were suspicious about Lizzie was, one, her story constantly changed. She was constantly changing her story, and it was just super suspicious. But I don't want to fail to mention that she actually was put on morphine. and given huge doses of it. And this was extremely common, but before all of her legal appearances, she was given like big doses of morphine, like way more than anyone would be given now. And like I said, it was common, it was regular, like very odd how things worked back in this time. So this could have affected her story changing, or the way that she acted, so I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, her story did constantly change, it was never consistent, and people found this odd, obviously. I mean, it is odd. Another suspicious thing about this case is, like I said before, one of the biggest motives that Lizzie could have had for killing her parents was money. And Lizzie actually, when she inherited money from her father after he was murdered, and when Lizzie inherited the money from her father after he was killed, she spent it literally right away. Like, she got to work with that money ASAP. She spent it immediately. And I know that people have different ways of coping. Maybe she just wanted to get rid of it, you know. Maybe this has nothing to do with her suspicion in the case, if that makes any sense. But it's just odd. Like, it's just odd. May I bring up again the denied poison that Lizzie tried to buy? She tried to buy the prussic acid, and she was denied that. And I mentioned that earlier, but that's another thing that needs to be brought up again because it's super suspicious. And also remember, Abby said that she thought that maybe there was poison in the food, that it wasn't just food poisoning, but it was poison like put into the food. So it was thought that maybe Lizzie tried to kill her parents in a less brutal way and tried to get her hands on some poison instead. Maybe she already got her hands on some poison and that's why the food was making them sick, but it wasn't strong enough to kill them. And maybe she decided that she needed to do something more to finally get rid of them, I guess would be her mindset. I don't want to say get rid of them, like they're trash, they're people. They were people, but you know what I'm saying. But oddly enough, this poison was actually not brought up in court. So they thought that it would just affect the case too much, and I mean, rightfully so. I mean, that's so odd that she was over here just trying to buy poison for seal coats, and I don't even know if she owned seal coats. Like, I want to know, did she actually own seal coats? When Lizzie was interviewed, or I guess more so interrogated, not interviewed, by police, she actually had a itty bitty spot of blood on her undergarment, but she told police that this was actually period blood, and police just went with it. They didn't really have a way to test it to see whose blood it really was back when this happened, so they just went with that. However, this could have been the blood of Andrew or Abby, but like I said, it was never tested. But may I remind you that Adelaide Churchill said that she saw Lizzie with an unstained dress, and Bridget, the maid, actually also testified that she saw Lizzie wearing a blue unstained dress. So both of these people are saying that Lizzie was wearing an unstained dress. Obviously, Lizzie could have committed the murders and then changed, but I would like to remind you that dresses back in this time period were extremely difficult to get on and off. And when Andrew was discovered murdered and, you know, Bridget was called down, the police were called in, he couldn't have been discovered that long after he was murdered because, like I said, he was still warm to the touch. So Lizzie probably would have discovered him long after he was murdered if she went to go change her dress, if that makes any sense. It's just the timeline doesn't make sense in that way, but it is still odd that she had a little speck of blood on her dress. I don't know, maybe it was period blood, who knows. Speaking of dresses, Emma Borden, when she came home, she saw Lizzie burning a dress in like a fireplace, I think, on August 7th. This was not the dress that Lizzie was seen wearing the day of the murders. That dress was turned to the police. However, Lizzie said that she was burning this dress because there was paint on it. But in court, Emma actually testified, because this was brought up in court, Emma actually testified that she told Lizzie to burn the dress. So weird stuff going on here. I mean, obviously she could have just said that to protect her sister, but I don't know. Something's going on here for sure. So there was enough suspicion and circumstantial evidence to arrest Lizzie. So they did. They arrested Lizzie on August 11th. And of course, when she was arrested, she said that she was not guilty. Her trial started on June 5th, 1993. And some interesting things happened in this trial. Like I said before, Lizzie's motive could have been money, but when asked if her father had ever mentioned a will to her, she said, quote, "He did not." end quote. Just like when she was interrogated by the police during the trial, Lizzie's story was a little inconsistent for sure. It was constantly changing. Another odd thing was that Lizzie would refuse to answer some questions, and some of these questions would have actually been beneficial to her case if she were to answer them. However, she didn't want to, and she refused to, which was odd, but once again, her mind might have not been in the right place because of that morphine she was on, which once again makes this case difficult because she was acting weird, but was it her or was it like the morphine in her system? Another thing that was odd that happened during the trial that would 110% not be allowed today was that Abby and Andrew's skulls were actually brought into the courtroom. They were shown in court. And when they were brought into the courtroom, Lizzie actually fainted when she saw them when they were brought in. When these skulls were brought into the courtroom, the handleless hatchet that was found in the attic was also brought in, and they compared it to the marks on the skull and showed that they were a match. So most likely this hatchet that was found was the murder weapon, which that would then make sense why the handle was not attached. Like I said, it was probably stained with blood and someone took it off. And reportedly there was evidence, like some ash on the hatchet, that the handle had been burned off, but I can't say that for sure. However, even though there was so much circumstantial evidence against Lizzie during this case, the jury argued that there really was no physical evidence. And that was true. There was really no physical evidence that Lizzie was the murderer. It was all circumstantial and reasonable doubt. During the trial, Lizzie never actually testified herself, and after 2 hours of debate, the jury came back with their verdict. Lizzie was not guilty. A lot of people were really excited about this and happy about this. They thought that Lizzie was innocent, but a lot of people were upset because they thought that Lizzie had done it and she was getting away with murder. So Lizzie obviously was released and went to go live the rest of her life, essentially. So after the trial, Lizzie basically just went back to living her normal life, but there was obviously a few changes. First of all, Lizzie and Emma actually did buy a house up on the hill with the money that they inherited from their father. I mean, who would have guessed? They named it Maplecroft, and Lizzie lived there for the rest of her life. However, Emma actually moved out at some point during the rest of Lizzie's life. There are many reasons that are speculated online. A lot of people think that they got into a fight. A lot of people say that it was because Lizzie developed a crush on an actress and Emma thought it was weird. She's probably homophobic and moved out. I don't think that was it, but that is a theory that's out there. But either way, Emma moved out of the house and the two sisters actually were not close for the rest of their lives. Lizzie actually changed her name after the trial. She changed it from Lizzie to Elizabeth. I don't know why or what sparked this change, but she changed it. Even though Lizzie was found not guilty, a lot of people, like I said, thought that she got away with murder and thought that she was guilty. And this actually affected Lizzie for the rest of her life. She was extremely lonely because, like I said, people thought that she still did it even though she was proven not guilty. And oddly enough, she was actually banned from the church that she used to go to because of the trial and because they thought that she was guilty and because she was accused of murder. Although Lizzie was lonely, she didn't have kids, she didn't have a significant other, she did have a ton of dogs. I don't know, she loved dogs, she loved animals, and she owned a lot of dogs. And you know what? Love that. I respect it. I love dogs too. Unfortunately, Lizzie died at age 66 on June 1st, 1927, which was years ago yesterday because I'm filming this on June 2nd, Wednesday, June 2nd. Yesterday was the anniversary of her death. That was the rest of Lizzie's life. However, we still have a mystery here because if Lizzie didn't do it, who did? Just because Lizzie was found not guilty does not mean that she did not do it. There is still reasonable doubt, and she still could have carried out these murders and clearly might have gotten away with it. However, there are other suspects to be examined, so let's examine them. The first suspect that we will now examine is John V. Morse. I'm sure you saw that one coming. So John had a few reasons why he might want to murder the Bordens. However, the focus was more so on Andrew, so if he was the murderer, he most likely killed Abby as a cover-up, or maybe because she saw him kill Andrew. But one reason that people think that John might have killed Andrew was a failing livestock business that they had. So not only was this business failing, which really angered John B. Morse, or I'll just call him John Morse for this, but he had also been putting his own money into it. So maybe he killed Andrew to get money out of him because he had been putting his own money into that and the money wasn't really doing much. He was kind of wasting money essentially. And interestingly enough, John may have known of a will. He might have known of Andrew's will. In court, a conversation between Lizzie and someone she was being questioned by took place, and it went a little like this. Question: did you know of your father making a will? Answer from Lizzie: no, sir, except I heard someone say that there was one several years ago. That is all I ever heard. Question: who did you hear say so? Answer: I think it was Mr. Morse. Question: what Morse? Answer: Uncle John V. Morse. So Lizzie was saying that her Uncle Morse might have known of a will. However, if Lizzie did commit the murder, she might have just wanted to make her uncle look guilty, and maybe that's why she said that, but I don't know. Seems interesting, especially if it was John, because the clear motive would have been money there. John's actual profession was actually a butcher. He was a butcher, and so the theory goes that maybe the weapon wasn't a hatchet or an axe. Maybe a cleaver was used to murder the couple. Another thing that's odd about John is that his alibi doesn't really add up either. Lizzie said that John was not seen from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. so he did not return home until after the murders, and he wasn't seen for a long period of time. When John returned home, he said that he was visiting a sick family member with the town doctor. However, the town doctor was at the Borden residence looking over the bodies of Andrew and Abby. So John couldn't have been with a doctor. So odd, isn't it, John? But other than that, there's not much to say that John killed Andrew and Abby. That's about it. The last big suspects, I say suspects because there's two, or I guess more so it's a theory, is that Lizzie and Bridget, the maid, actually killed the Bordens together. The theory goes that Lizzie and Bridget actually were in a relationship, or that they had something romantic together, and they killed Abby and Andrew so that they wouldn't find out. Some people think that maybe one of the parents found out about the relationship, and so they killed that parent and killed the other one to cover it up. A lot of people think it was Abby that found out about it, so they killed Abby, and then they killed Andrew to cover it up. And something interesting about the way that Andrew was found is that Abby was hit in the back of the head, which was probably because she was turned around and couldn't see her attacker, so it made it easier for her attacker to attack her. And Andrew was thought to be asleep on the couch, so he was probably sleeping when he was attacked. But we can't really know because his eyes were like completely destroyed. Like whoever was attacking him really went for his eyes. And a lot of people think that this may have been because he saw something that he was not supposed to. So a lot of people think that maybe Lizzie and Bridget were seen together by Andrew when he saw that and he wasn't supposed to. So they killed him to cover it up, and they really went for his eyes because he wasn't supposed to see it. Like I said earlier, Lizzie apparently had a crush on an actress later in her life, so she could have been bisexual or questioning her sexuality, but being gay, bi, pan wasn't really something that was common back in this day, and it was something that was really frowned upon, honestly. Unfortunately. But that's about it for that theory. This theory doesn't make sense to me because, like I said, like Lizzie and her sister Emma literally called Bridget Maggie because they couldn't even take the time to learn her new name. So it doesn't make sense to me that they were like in love with each other. You know, I mean, it could have been a thing, but I think it's more so like a fan fiction that people threw together. Those are the top suspects. However, there are two other suspects that don't really make sense, which is one, the maid, Bridget, on her own. She's a suspect, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why she would want to kill the Bordens. I mean, they're her employer. She can't make money without them. And we already mentioned earlier that maybe a random person did this, but once again, I don't think so, and neither does anyone else. I personally think, weird theory, but I actually think that Lizzie and John B. Morse kind of did it together. I think that both of their motives were money, and maybe they possibly did it together. But I don't know. That's a theory that I came up with in my head. I don't know if I completely believe it, but I think that could make sense. But when I was looking at theories, that one did not pop up. But that is the end of this case. I hope that you guys are more educated in this case now. I'm so happy that I was able to make this channel finally, and that I will be able to make videos on here now. I'm going to be trying to upload on Wednesdays, but that might not always work out, so I might skip a week or two here and there. But yeah, that's about it. I hope that you all have a lovely day, and let me know what you think down below. Who do you think killed the Bordens? I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.